Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of the Winter Seminar Series. My name is Jessica McLinsey, and I'm with Southern Maryland RC&D here in our Leonardtown office. In the chat, I am going to place the link to our Facebook page. So if you haven't visited us on Facebook yet, be sure to do so and follow us on Facebook so that you can see all of our upcoming events and learn more about the projects that we're working on. We do things from land conservation in the local Southern Maryland area. We're working on community restoration projects, and we're working on community outreach projects like the Winter Seminar Series you joined this evening. Now, before I turn it over to Andy, who's graciously joined us this evening, I would like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. So we are here in Zoom world, which means please be sure to keep everything internet appropriate. You are welcome to turn your video on if you'd like to feel as though you're a part of the conversation. And you're also able to unmute if you would like to ask questions at the end to Andy. Now, I will be monitoring the chat for questions as well, and Andy is going to save time at the end for questions in case we have lots of good questions, which I'm sure we will. So I'd like to start by introducing Andy. Andy Brown is retired from Calvert County Natural Resources Division, where he worked for 34 years as a naturalist. Andy grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, where he began birding as a teenager with Prince George's Audubon and received his bird banding license at the age of 16. Andy began working with barn owls in the Patuxent River Valley in the early 1990s. He currently serves on the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership Farmland Raptor Committee as the Farmland Raptor Coordinator, and he currently resides in Calvert County, Maryland. And with that, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Jessica. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight and sharing your Sunday evening with me. I retired from Calvert County 3 years ago. And as Jessica mentioned, I've been working with barn owls and kestrels throughout my career there in Calvert County Natural Resources. But upon retiring, I kind of devoted all of my efforts into coordinating this Maryland Farmland Raptor program. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. It's a nonprofit organization that was formed in 2016 in response to the Maryland State Wildlife Action Plan. In 2019, we created the Maryland Farmland Raptor program. And for some reason, I'm not advancing slides. Jessica. Darn. I wonder why that's happening.
Let's see, try unsharing and then share again and see if that works.
Because it was working fine before.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Still not. Well, I apologize. I don't know why this is happening.
I can see your mouse. Do you have two monitors hooked up? Could it possibly be
Not.
a second monitor?
Let's see. Let's do entire screen. Hot dog. There we go.
There we go. All right.
Okay. So the Farmland Raptor Committee, we started in 2016. We formed a committee of folks, the advisory committee, and over the last 2019, I'm sorry, over the last several years, the work has kind of fallen on two principal investigators, myself and Alex Pellegrini. You may know Alex from Patuxent River Park, where he has worked there for the last 4 years, and so he does all the Farmland Raptor work as a volunteer on the side, and he's just devoted a tremendous amount of time and effort to the program. So we wouldn't have been able to accomplish nearly as much as we have without his help. So, as I mentioned before this state wildlife action plan. The federal government has a program where they give funds to each individual state for wildlife conservation. And in 2005, they required that each state, in order to qualify for this funding, needed to provide a wildlife action plan that identified all the species of wildlife within that state that are in need of conservation, and develop a plan that would outline what steps each state was going to take for those species of wildlife. It needs to be reviewed or updated every 10 years. So in 2005 was Maryland's first one, 2015 number two, and then next year the 2025 SWAP State Wildlife Action Plan is up for renewal again. So it'll be interesting to see what changes develop here in the next year. But the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership formed as a result of this state wildlife action plan. The main goal for MBCP is to create partnerships with organizations from around the state of Maryland to help assist in those conservation efforts for those birds that are listed in this state wildlife action plan. And that's where the Farmland Raptor program comes in. Oops, too fast. One of the goals of this state wildlife action plan is to list those individual species in need of conservation based on their threat to extirpation. So on a state level, globally, there's the IUCN that has listings that are 1 through 5, and those 1 through 5 are then adopted on a national level, which is the federal. They're listed as N1 through 5, and then again on the state level as S1 through 5. So S1 is the most imperiled at a very high risk of extirpation, and as you go down the list, 2, 3, and 4, they become less and less at risk. You can see here on this slide. The Farmland Raptor Committee identified 4 species of raptor that were listed from the state action plan and that rely on grasslands and agricultural areas, as well as marshlands, for survival here in Maryland. There are 2 owls and 2 diurnal raptors: the barn owl, the short-eared owl, the American kestrel, and the northern harrier. Harrier is listed as an S2 in Maryland, imperiled. Short-eared owl is an S1, highly endangered. American kestrel is not listed as of yet, and it probably will be as a result of our most recent breeding bird atlas. And barn owl is listed as an S2 species as well. The Farmland Raptor program has set a series of goals for how to help and provide conservation for these 4 species of birds of prey. Gain a better understanding of the ecology of farmland raptors in the state of Maryland. That includes reproduction, mortality, habitat use, dispersal, foraging areas, and seasonal movements. Those things that we often call population demographics, which is the ecology of those birds. In order to do that, we set some objectives to obtain a baseline for statewide distribution, where these birds are found, and in what abundance they're found. There's a number of different ways that we're doing this, and I'll go into them a little more in depth later on. Identify those critical habitats where these birds are currently existing, and what areas are important to preserve. Um, to ensure adequate and consistent monitoring of those populations. That's a lot easier, more easily done with those species that use man-made nest boxes like barn owl and American kestrel. A little bit more challenging for short-eared owl and northern harrier. And then broaden citizen participation, and that's kind of why I'm here tonight. We have developed a very intensive volunteer program where folks can get involved with the monitoring process, and that has been a very successful program. Lastly, to be a principal gateway to all of the data. So any data from any folks who are actually working on projects with these 4 species of raptor, we want to be the principal gateway for all that information. You know, we participate in a number of different programs, global programs, national programs, where our data is given to them in as part of a larger scale study. So it's nice to have that principal gateway. I recently attended the World Owl Conference in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and presented on the status of the American barn owl in the Mid-Atlantic states. And that's what I'm going to present to you this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about barn owl ecology and their status here in Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic. This is the distribution map that's produced by the National Audubon Society. Looks pretty widespread, doesn't it? Appears that they're found almost in every single state. Some of those mountain states, Montana, Colorado, the Dakotas, and the upper Midwest, those areas are extremely cold during the winter months and well into the breeding season, and therefore they can't really survive the cold temperatures. These guys are definitely limited to warmer climates. I guess as climate change occurs, that distribution line may start to creep a little bit north for them. So hopefully that will be a good thing. Barn owl rankings, both globally and nationally, are listed as secure at a very low risk of extirpation. They are globally a G5 and nationally an N5. So around the world, they're in good shape, and apparently on a national level here in the U.S., they're in good shape as well. But you'll see in the upcoming slides that may not necessarily be the truth. We have approximately let's see 31 states list the barn owl individually as an S3 or lower. Okay, so that means they are at some level of vulnerability, all the way from at risk to a very high risk of extirpation. 31 of our lower 48 states, they are not present in 5. They're absent in 5 of those states. Only 11 have them listed as an S4 or 5, and a status is unknown for 3. So looking at those statistics, it's hard for me to support a national ranking of an N5 at a very low risk of extirpation, when nearly 3/4 of the state have them in some level of risk. So we're hopefully that status will change sometime in the near future. Alex helped in the last year pull together data on on what the abundance and distribution of barn owls are in the Mid-Atlantic states, using various data sets, including Breeding Bird Atlas and eBird etc. So I'm going to run through them pretty quickly about where they are in all of the surrounding states here in Maryland. In New Jersey, the last breeding bird atlas occurred in 1999. They haven't done anything more recent than that. Speaking with the folks in New Jersey, they feel that their numbers have declined significantly, and on a state from the State Wildlife Agency in New Jersey. They're currently listed as an S3 of vulnerable, but they anticipate barn owl being upgraded to S1 in the next State Wildlife Action Plan there. In 1999, they occurred in 37 of over 1,000 blocks, which is about 3%. That number is considerably less today. Delaware seems to have a fairly strong population, but it's very limited to a specific geographical area of the state. They are currently listed as an S2 imperiled species. They occurred in 13 of 266 breeding bird atlas blocks. This is in 2012, which was 4.8%. That is the highest percentage of all of the mid-Atlantic states. Pennsylvania is just starting out their next breeding bird atlas. As a matter of fact, I think this year was the first field season, but the last one that was completed also in 2012 listed barn owl as an S2 imperiled, occurred in 85 of 5,400 blocks, only 1.5%. And you can see that from the map there, they're fairly limited to that southeastern area of the state. Virginia just completed their breeding bird atlas. They're listed as an S3, but they probably will be uplisted in the next round of the State Wildlife Action Plan. This is data from the most recent one, and they occurred in less than 1% of the atlas blocks there. You can see from the map, they're really pretty much limited to the Shenandoah Valley, the Great Valley that runs through Virginia. So let's talk a little bit about barn owls in Maryland, some of their ecology. The history of conservation efforts as it applies to us. In 1986, the National Audubon Society placed barn owl on the blue list. Okay, if you're familiar with what that blue list is, it's a list of birds that are of concern. Their numbers are declining, and so yeah, 1986. That was almost 40 years ago. In 1988. Kind of as in response to the Audubon Blue List, Maryland DNR started to do some nest box work over in Dorchester County, and did some nest box work in Frederick counties. And a couple of folks, Glenn Thayers and Scott Smith, published a paper that said barn owls were marsh birds too. And they had pretty good success with their nest box program over in Dorchester County. In 1989, Prince George's County started putting up nest boxes and had good nesting success along the Patuxent River. Excuse me. And in 1991, Maryland placed the barn owl on its watch list of designated wildlife who were of concern, and they did exactly that. They watched them. 1994, Calvert County started our nest box project along the Patuxent River, and we had really good a good set of nest boxes that ran up and down the Patuxent River on both sides, and into Anne Arundel County. So we covered a lot of good habitat along the Patuxent River Valley for many years. In 1999, we started with some nest boxes in St. Mary's County with Melissa Boyle, who some of you may know. And in 2015, which is 25 years after the 1991 Maryland watch list designation. Um, Maryland finally included them in their state wildlife action plan as a species of greatest conservation need. So they essentially watched the barn owl decline significantly over 25 years statewide without really doing much to help prevent that. So if we look at breeding bird atlas data in Maryland from the first two BBAs, 1987 and 2006, we had a statewide decline of barn owl breeding of 72%. Um, Very significant. And talking with Gabriel Foley yesterday at the MOS board meeting, he was telling us that they're down even 30 more percent from the 2006 designation. So their numbers are steadily declining. They are listed currently, as I mentioned, in Maryland as an S2. The 2006 Breeding Bird Atlas, they occurred in 24 of 1,300 blocks, and which is about 1.8%, a little bit shy of 2%. But as I mentioned, those numbers are going to be significantly less now. For most folks who have had the pleasure of seeing a barn owl in the wild, this is the glimpse that most people get. They're secretive birds. They try to stay away from humans, and they're very easily disturbed by people. They live up in the tops of old tobacco barns and silos, unused silos, and abandoned buildings, and they're very sensitive to people. So sneaking in and seeing them and causing them to flush or fly during the day oftentimes will result in the owl moving away and looking for another place to roost. Barn owls are in a group of owls that are very unique. There are two main categories of owls. The ones on the left there, the Strix owls, demonstrated by the barred owl, which most folks are familiar with, makes up about 250 species worldwide. That's the Strix owls are called the quote true owls. And the barn owl belongs to a group of called Tyto owls. Tyto owls are very different morphologically than the true owls. Some of the different physical characteristics that you can see here: the shape of the face. Barn owls have a heart-shaped face, whereas most of our true owls are very round. Barn owls have very, very long legs compared to the other species of true owls. They have some differences in the shape of their syrinx, which is their voice box. So barn owls cannot hoot like the other species of owls do. They make a terrible screechy sound that sounds like shh, shh. You wouldn't even think it would be an owl if you hear it at night. So they're very, very different from most of your typical or true owls. Here's the phylogenetic tree for barn owls. They broke away from the Strix owls about 45 million years ago, and then about 25 million years ago, barn owls became their own separate species. In the genera, there in the family Titonidae, there are two genera of Titonid owls. There's the Titoninae, which includes the barn owl, and then the Phylonidae, which has these very odd looking things from Indonesia called bay owls. They're small, little, tiny forest-dwelling Tyto, and they're very odd looking creatures. I'd love to see one day. Among the Titonidae, there are four main groups. Those are the grass owl, the barn owl, the masked owl, and the sooty owl. Grass, sooty, and masked all occur in Australasia. So Australia and southeastern Asia. Barn owls are distributed globally, worldwide. There are only a handful of cosmopolitan wildlife. in the world that barn owls share their designation with. Humans are one of those. um, but in terms of birds, peregrine falcon is one, the osprey is the other, and cattle egret, oddly enough, is the other cosmopolitan bird. So there's really only five birds that are found in every continent except Antarctica. Barn owls inhabit open grasslands, as I mentioned before, and why they're designated as part of the Farmland Raptor program. They prey on a specific type of rodent that is found in those grasslands, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. This is a pretty interesting shot of Washington, D.C. and the Smithsonian Castle, which was built in 1885. The photo on the left shows what the landscape was like in and around Washington, D.C. in 1885. Very, very few trees, lots of agricultural area. Most of the forest had been completely cleared in and around the Mid-Atlantic states by that time, and by the end of the 1800s, forest animals like white-tailed deer were virtually gone. They were only found in remote areas in far western Maryland. The Smithsonian Castle, the American Museum of Natural History, interestingly enough, shortly after it was built, became the home of a pair of nesting barn owls in the late 1800s, and they occupied that nest site in that castle continuously year after year until 1950s, until the late 1950s, which is pretty remarkable to think about barn owls nesting within the city limits of Washington, D.C. Pretty neat stuff. Barn owls have a very unique way of hunting their prey. They have long wings that they that they fly low over the grassland, and they'll fly left and right, covering the whole grassland, and then turn and go north south. And this is called quartering, and they'll follow this pattern over the grassland over and over and over again, coursing the area. They have a very unique ability to hear their prey. Barn owls are considered to have the greatest hearing ability of all nocturnal predators, not just birds, but all nocturnal predators. They have interesting feather shape and structure on the front of their face, as you see on the left there. They're very loose, and the veins of the feathers are spread apart. Said to be auditorily translucent, allows the sound to move through the feather. And then the feathers on the back of the head, or on the back of the facial disc, are very dense and thick. And that creates a way for the sound to bounce off of those feathers and to be funneled directly into the ear opening. They also have asymmetrical ear openings, one higher on the skull than lower than the other. This allows the birds to be able to hear the sound from two different locations, and in a sense, type of triangulation, and they can judge distances very accurately just by sound alone. There's been studies of barn owls dating back into the 1950s, where owls were placed in a fairly large room with absolutely no light at all, zero light. Owls' eyes are the same as ours in terms of they are light receptors, so they need light in order to be able to see. So in total darkness, they cannot rely on eyesight at all. Owls put in this room, and were able to capture their prey 99.9% of the time just by sound alone. Quite remarkable study. So as the owl flies around over the grassland, it listens for its prey. It will hear a rodent scratching around in the grass. They will stop midair, kind of hover a little bit and turn that big facial disc down towards the prey, locate where it's coming from, and then plunge themselves into the grass with those long legs and sharp talons, without even seeing the rodent that is hidden underneath the grass. They can still capture their food. They are really masters of the sky. So let's take a minute real quickly and go through what in the world we might be talking about in terms of barn owl prey. Um, there have been numerous studies in the U.S. on what barn owls eat. As a matter of fact, nearly 90% of all of the studies done on barn owls in the U.S. have been concentrated on food habits. So when you look at small mammals, they make up the majority of their diet. Up in the upper left-hand corner is a mole, M-O-L-E. We're all very familiar with moles who dig those tunnels in our yards. They are insectivores, so they do not do damage to vegetables or crops or even landscape and gardening plants. They actually will eat a lot of insects that do damage our beloved plants. So that is a mole, M-O-L-E. Very, very rarely will you ever find mole remnants in a barn owl's diet. Over to the right, with the short little ears and the short stubby tail, is a rodent called a vole, V-O-L-E, and it's related to a lemming that you might be familiar with up in the Arctic that snowy owls eat. This guy is extremely destructive to our crops and to our plants and our landscape plants. We have three species of vole, possibly four, three species of vole that are found in our state. Widespread and most abundant is the meadow vole, and he lives in the fallow fields, pasture land, and meadows. There's a woodland vole who, just like his name says, lives in the woodland areas. That's the one you probably will encounter in your gardens, the woodland vole, who destroys a lot of your landscape plants. Then we have a red-backed vole, which is found in far western Maryland, and possibly southern vole, southeastern vole, which is found maybe in the lower reaches of St. Mary's County. So this is the prime target of barn owl's food source. If given the opportunity, they will eat nothing but meadow voles. And the meadow voles are found in those areas where the owls hunt. And so if you drop down below the meadow vole, on the lower right-hand side is the mouse, and he has a long tail and very large eyes and very large ears. We're all familiar with this guy, the white-footed mouse, who invades our homes in the fall and winter months, seeking warmth and shelter and food. But they are very rarely part of a barn owl's diet. And then moving back to the left again is the shrew. Okay, this is a short-tailed shrew, a fairly large individual. You probably have encountered dead shrews laying on the pathway while you're out hiking in the woods, or maybe even if you have house cats, they oftentimes like to bring short-tailed shrews up to the porch. Shrews have a tendency to be distasteful for predators, and therefore they are often killed, but not consumed. They do have some toxins in them that are quite distasteful. So out of this group of small mammals, the meadow vole is the one that the barn owl eats. Some telemetry studies in Europe have done some work on foraging areas, home range, etc. Nobody really has done that kind of work in the U.S. They have found in Great Britain that barn owls need about a 500-acre area during the nesting season to survive, and that increases threefold during the winter months. That's a big area and it's all going to be really dependent on food availability. Some studies in Sweden found that the majority of the barn owls dispersed only about a mile at the most from their nesting areas to forage. And but however, they were definitely clocked going much further. One even traveled as much as 30 miles from its nest site each night to go catch food and bring it back to the chicks. So, where did barn owls live before we had buildings for them to exist in? They are considered cavity nesters, so they nested in the majority nested in large cavities in trees, much like what barred owls do. Um, they were found in they were in grasslands where they would nest in large piles of grassland and on the ground, very much like a short-eared owl would. As the eastern United States forests were cleared, these birds moved eastward from the Midwest and took advantage of all the habitat that we created for them. There were probably barn owls prior to colonization existing in our marshes on the Delmarva. Um, so, but they definitely have benefited from humans clearing the forest. They are sexually dimorphic, which means males and females look different. The male on the right is very white in color, especially on its belly, and small, tiny little black spots on its breast, sometimes even none at all. Female on the left is about 20% larger than the male. She's buffy in color and has larger and darker spots on her chest. Courtship begins here in Maryland. Excuse me, about the end of March. I'm sorry, about the end of February and runs through March, and the first eggs are probably laid sometime in late March or early April. Now, weather conditions and food availability will adjust that. Barn owls are known to nest year round, so they will continually nest after one clutch is done, and nest again, and will nest all around the calendar year, depending on food availability. Here in Maryland, that is a rare occurrence. We usually only have one nest per season, and that occurs in the spring, as I mentioned. In the nest box, the male tends to find the nesting cavity, and he'll defend that cavity, and he will fly around in the late winter, early spring, and call as he flies around the area, catching meadow voles. He'll bring them back to the nest cavity and stash them in there, cache their prey, in hopes of attracting a female. So the female comes along, she hears him vocalizing out there. He sounds like a pretty decent guy, and takes a peek in the nest box, and guess what? We got a bunch of holes in there. So he's a pretty good provider as well. And so then she has the final say whether or not he's acceptable or not as a mate. We have found in other areas around the world, namely Israel and Europe, that females in their first year or two, the first 3 years, tend to be a little fickle, and they will nest one year with one male, and then they will leave and go nest the second year with another guy, and maybe the third year with a third one. And once they get to be about 3 to 4 or 5 years old, they tend to settle down with one particular male and will then continue to breed with him for the remainder of her life. So she plays the field for a little while she's young, kicking up her heels, and then settles down when she finds a particularly good mate. Um, One egg is laid every 2 to 3 days. The average clutch size is about seven. We rarely ever see clutches of seven in Maryland. We do have them larger clutches on the eastern shore, but on this side of the bay, we average about 5 eggs per clutch. The female has the sole responsibility of incubating. She begins incubating as soon as the first egg is laid, and it takes about 34 days for a chick to hatch. It's a long incubation period. Um, they have very little fat. Barn owls have very little fat, and therefore their yolks are small in their eggs, and so they take a little bit longer time to develop in the egg. the the eggs hatch, as I mentioned before, as you know, because she starts incubating with the first egg laid, that egg is going to hatch before the second, third, and so forth. So that's asynchronous hatching is what that's called. There's an interesting theory as to why they do this. Is that if for some reason food sources disappear or dry up, the older chick has a better chance of survival rather than the entire clutch being wiped out. So in a clutch of barn owl chicks, you'll have varying ages from as much as 2 weeks from the oldest to the youngest, which is really quite fascinating. For the first several weeks of their life, they cannot thermoregulate, and so she needs to sit in there with them and brood them, especially on those cool spring nights. So oftentimes you'll see the female in the box sitting on the chicks. After about 3 weeks of age, they can regulate their own body temperature, and then she departs. She does not stay in there with them. And keep them warm. They probably pester her to death, begging and feeding and begging for food constantly, and so she needs a little bit of a respite from the kids. So they are not very attractive chicks. I did this, they are perfect candidates for only a face a mother could love. These things look like something out of a 1950s alien film. I think it's a uh, uh, pretty interesting little raptor. If you look at their skull, you can see it's very long, elongated, and they look very much like a vulture, and that's a characteristic of the Taito. Very different from the true owls, but they grow quickly and they quickly become very cute once they get those little facial discs on. They stay in the nest for 9 weeks, which is a long period of time. So, the whole nesting process can take, can take, half a year, essentially. The largest clutch ever recorded was in Israel of 19 eggs being laid, of which 16 of those 19 survived. It probably was two different females that were mated with the same male in the same cavity, which does happen on occasion. Um, there It's estimated that mortality rates in the early part, within the first year of their life, may be as high as 75 to 80%. But once they pass that first year, if they've survived that first year and have established a territory that has good food sources, they can live up to 10 or 15 years in the wild. The longevity record for a wild barn owl is about 15 years old. So uh, we're working currently on the barn owl distribution and abundance statewide. In 20, we really only have about 30 to 40 known nest sites in the state. Um, some of the criteria that we use for putting up nest boxes is obviously if there are birds present. Historically, if there have been birds nesting in that structure, it's a good place to put it up. Proximity to historical nest sites and suitable habitat. Um, we tried to band every single barn owl we can throughout the state of Maryland so that we can track them and see, learn things about their longevity and their natural history. We started trapping adults at the nest boxes because for 30 years we banded only chicks and got very little information from banding just chicks. So in the last 4 years, we have been capturing and banding adults as well, and learned so much about their ecology. Site and mate fidelity is much lower than we originally had thought. The age structure of our study populations, all older birds, a majority of older birds. So there's very little recruitment of young birds in that population. Once they get there, they stay. However, there's a lot of recruitment from outside of the population. We get a lot of new birds coming in to those study areas. We have two different study sites that have been working on over the last couple of years. One in the Patuxent River Valley, and the other at Deal Island on the Lower Eastern Shore. And there's some pretty significant differences between those two. It looks like the Eastern Shore areas are limited by nest site availability. There's not a whole lot of nest boxes over there. We've had them nesting in the attics of houses that are occupied by people, which is highly unlikely, probably never even been documented before. And even on the balcony of a condominium in Crisfield, as the bird on the right is seen there. So it's clear that they have limited nesting areas. On Poplar Island, we had them nesting twice in heavy machinery, excavators, which is pretty amazing. We also found that their food sources are a little bit different from the Patuxent River Valley and the Lower Eastern Shore marshlands. On the Lower Eastern Shore marshlands, they feed almost entirely on meadow voles, which are found in that low marsh. I'm sorry, it's called the high marsh, but it has a low vegetation, Spartina patens, salt meadow hay, that hosts a lot of meadow voles. On the Patuxent River, we have very few meadow voles in the marsh. We have marsh rice rat, and that makes up a large component of their diet in the Patuxent River Valley. Interestingly, we've learned some things about our adult population. One of our nest boxes on the Lower Eastern Shore, we caught adults in there. They were both banded, and they turned out to be siblings. And it was probably the first record of brother and sister pairing in the nest box and raising young. The following year, the male was at that nest box number 6, but he had found a different partner, an older female from an adjacent nest box. Lots of interesting stuff going on, drama in the population. Have a little actual Game of Thrones going on here in our population. But barn owls are not really just a beautiful bird, another pretty face. They represent areas in our landscape that are relatively untouched by human disturbance, and if we lose those areas, we're not just losing barn owls, but we're losing all of the host of wildlife that rely on those secretive areas in our environment, and that would be a terrible shame. So I'd like to thank a lot of folks who have been part of the Farmland Raptor program over the last few years, as you can see. And this year we're starting to do some more intensive work with American kestrel and short-eared owl. And in fact, I'm pleased to announce that 2 nights ago, we caught our first short-eared owl in Maryland through the Farmland Raptor program. It was the second adult ever banded in the state. So it's a pretty exciting project that we have going on, and are looking forward to really developing that like we have with barn owls. So with that, I would like to end my presentation and take some questions if we have much time.
Yeah, we have time for questions.
Great.
Andy, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of your experiences and
Very well.
insight with us and such wonderful photos. They're beautiful creatures. So
Yes, they
thank you for
are.
sharing all of that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to unmute. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, Allison, go ahead.
Hey, Andy.
Hi,
So,
how are you?
yeah, thanks
Good to
again
see you.
for
Yep.
joining us. Good to see you too.
Yeah.
So, I do have a big question. So, aside from like the nest box monitoring, do you guys take records of barn owls that you might find on properties?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so because I know that there's a lot of land trusts out there that have to monitor properties, and I've definitely seen barn owls in some structures,
Yeah.
but I don't know who to report those to. And
Yep.
then I
That
guess
would
my
be me.
follow-up is just to make sure that we're thinking about the landowners, would that then put any restrictions on the landowners?
No, not at all.
Okay, because we need to make sure that they know that
Yes,
because that would
exactly.
be
Yep.
that would be something they would not
Yeah,
like.
that's been a really big challenge for us over the last few years. One of the first things that I asked Alex to do is to review all of the historic nesting data from all over the state. We had some data from Scott Smith from the early 1980s, and so he went through and found the locations on Google Earth to make sure they were still farmland and not housing developments or shopping centers, and tried to reach out to. They found the landowner contacts. Some of them had changed, obviously, and tried to reach out to all of them. He got zero response, zero.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was quite discouraging. So we're trying to look for other ways to get around finding other ways to detect the presence of these owls in the area, and that's how we're kind of focusing our efforts on those places where we know that the owls exist.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it's tough because a lot of folks don't realize one of the most common questions that we often get was, well, is it going to eat my, kill my sheep, or is it going to, eat my chickens, or things like that, because they're fearful of the impact on their livestock or their pets, and so most folks don't realize that these things only eat meadow voles. Um,
Right.
but that's something that if anybody has record of owls existing, of barn owls existing in a barn, in a silo, somewhere like that, we definitely want to at least get that documented. Okay, so that we have it in our statewide distribution data. Okay, even if we don't ever get a nest box put up at that location, at least we have a
Right.
record of it. Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't need it because they're already nesting in a silo.
Exactly.
Right. So,
Hmm.
okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Do you have a website or an email that you'd like to share in the chat so
Sure.
people?
Yes. The website is part of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, right? So it's Maryland Birds, spelled out Maryland, marylandbirds.org. And you can get to the Farmland Raptor program through that website and my email address, which is farmlandraptors@marylandbirds.org. Yeah. So, and that's on the website.
Okay, wonderful.
Hmm.
And we had a question in the chat. What owls are present in Frederick County?
Well, interestingly enough, when you I need to change my bio a little bit, because I now no longer live in Calvert. I live in Frederick. So I've moved to Frederick County. There, this area of Central Maryland seems to be one of the last strongholds of barn owls and American kestrels statewide. Okay, there's like three main population areas for barn owls in the state. The Delmarva, okay, which has a really good, strong, stable population of barn owls. Then this Central Maryland area, which is kind of teetering on the edge. And that's where we're focusing a lot of our effort here now on Central Maryland, Frederick, Upper Montgomery, Washington, and Carroll counties to try to get a good nest box program set up there. And then the Patuxent River Valley. The Patuxent River Valley, we pretty much have saturated that area with nest boxes, and that population is just hanging on by a talon. Actually, some years we have no nesting at all, and other years we may have 10 nests. So it really fluctuates a lot in the Patuxent River. There are 9 species of owl found documented in Maryland. Okay, about half of those are resident birds that are here year round. So you've got barred owl, barn owl, those 2, great horned, screech, and those 4: screech, barred, and great horn. Then the rest of them are either migrants passing through, or will come and stay with us for the winter. So we have northern saw-whet owl that kind of passes through during migration. Some of them will stay with us all winter long. Then we have long ear and short ear, who will winter here in Maryland. And then we have snowy, which shows up every once in a while during busy eruptive years, and it looks like this year might be one of those. So keep a lookout for snowy owls this year. And then the last one is burrowing owl, and burrowing owl is really only documented twice in Maryland, and one of them was in St. Mary's County, which was kind of cool, in 2020, just relatively recently. So from Central Maryland and Frederick County, all of those guys can be found, okay, with the exception of the burrowing owl. Right.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And another question in the chat: do any Maryland owls other than barn owls also nest in buildings and structures?
A barred owl will nest in a nest box. A barred owl and a screech owl will use nest boxes. Okay, but not buildings and structures. That's pretty much limited to barn. But you could put a nest box up if you have a wooded area, especially with a creek or a ravine nearby. Southern Maryland is just an ideal place for barred owls. I mean, because the way the landscape is, wooded ravines is what they love. You can put a nest box up, and they'll occupy that nest box. A barred owl will. So,
Great, thanks. And I have a question for you.
yes.
As we see climate continue to change our area, and you talk about the species that come through during migration, are you all starting to see that timing change as the season is slowly changing, or different species coming through that hadn't before?
Not so much in terms of different species, but for example, there was a friend of mine who does a lot of saw-whet owl work in Alberta. He has been trapping and banding saw-whet owls since the mid 1970s, and just recently went through all of their data, and they have seen that the peak of the migration has shifted almost an entire week later, from what it was in the early 70s to where it is now. So yes, so timing definitely has and will continue to change.
That's interesting. Yeah, thank you. So another question in the chat: what is a good source of building plans or designs for nest boxes?
Unfortunately, I don't. I've seen so many different nest box plans online, and over the years, I have taken many of those nest box plans and adapted them because I don't like this out of that one, but I do like this from that one, and so forth. Just to give you an example, I started working with the folks over at Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, and they were using a nest box plan that I see very frequently on the internet. Okay, it's relatively narrow and long. It's good, plenty long. It's about 24 inches long, but it's only 11 and a half inches wide. And when you get a clutch of 7 chicks in there, that's really not a whole lot of space for them. And what we encountered over a 2-year period using that size nest box is those birds jump out of the nest box before they can fly. Now, a lot of different species of owls will do that. Horned owls, screech owls, barred owls, they all will leave the nest and what's called branching before they can actually fly. But I had never known barn owl to do that. And in cases when you use a larger nest box, they don't do that. They stay in the box until they're able to actually fly. So we replaced all of those smaller nest boxes at Blackwater with a larger design and sure enough, they stayed in the box until they were ready to fledge, ready to fly. I have plans in the works of getting those nest box plans up on our website, on the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership website. But our web developer resigned and took another job, and so I don't have that. I don't have that skill or ability to do that. Where we're getting, I have a couple of companies who are volunteering to put those nest box plans that I have done by hand by drawing into a CAD, using a CAD program, and so we will have them up there soon. Okay, but unfortunately they're not available. I do want to say please use some caution on the internet that you there's a number of different nest box companies who are selling nest boxes made of plastic. Okay, and the birds do not like the plastic. It's too slick for them to grab hold of with their feet, and so they're relatively costly. They're nearly $200. So you go and make this investment and will never be used by an owl. So I do want to warn folks against that. But yeah, if you could find a nest box online that is at a minimum 15 inches wide and 24 inches long, somewhere in that those dimensions, that should probably be sufficient. So
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions this evening, either by raise of hand or in chat? Okay, Andy, why don't you tell us your website one more time so that if
Yep.
anyone has questions later on, they know where to find you.
Okay. Yep. It is marylandbirds.org, and that's all spelled out. Maryland is spelled out. Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Andy, thank you again for spending your evening with us and sharing all of your expertise with us. And thank you, everyone that joined. I'm glad that you were joining us for our winter seminar series. Remember, we still have 4 more months ahead for our winter seminar series. And I look forward to seeing everyone on the second Sunday of each month at 6 p.m. So again, Andy, thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you in January.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you.